Welcome to WeCan, Navid Nazemian, the world's #1 executive coach, best-selling author, keynote speaker, and board member. You help senior executives and leadership teams accelerate and successfully transition into new roles. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your story and your insights today to help others. Talk to us about your work. Tell our audience what you do exactly.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, Stephanie, for the warm welcome. And I am super excited to have this conversation with you. Well, what I do is really simple. I used to work in large organizations for 26 years. And the last 20 of those years, I worked in the HR function, HR department. And I was coaching on the side for about 8 years. And writing my book. And in the year my book launched, it became such an unexpected success that I was put in a position to decide whether I wanted to continue with my career or if I wanted to kind of, say goodbye to the beloved corporate career and go full-time into coaching, writing, and speaking. And that's what I decided to do about 4 years ago. And as they say, the rest is history.
Amazing. Navid, so talk to us about how one becomes a Navid, those pivotal points so younger audiences especially can retrace your steps.
Sure. So I guess what I would go back to is my curiosity. I think this is always a good starting point. I was always curious about learning more, being able to contribute at a more deeper level, and not assuming that I am a finished product. These days, they call it the growth mindset, right? Which is something that I didn't even know existed 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I started out in sales and I worked in two different sales positions at about 3 years each. The first one was B2C sales and the other one was B2B sales. And I was pretty good at it, Stephanie. There's one thing I love about the sales function, which is it's super transparent. You know exactly how good or you are or how much
Yeah.
room there is to improve. And that being said, I did in those 6 years discover my passion for HR. And I really desperately wanted to move into the HR function. But at the time, this is in the year 2002, very few companies were prepared to take a risk on me because I was your sales guy, arguably a successful one, but that doesn't necessarily qualify me to become a good HR person. And so, as they say, it takes one person, one opportunity to be able to demonstrate what you really have a burning desire for. And that was my first boss in HR, Dania Frech is her name. She's a German lady, and who was the head of HR for global ops at Adidas. And she gave me a chance and said, look, I'm going to hire you into the very first level HR position we have. You will have to prove yourself right from day one. Don't expect any cookie points from any one of your peers because you will essentially have to perform from day one. But the reason I'm offering this to you is obviously because you really badly want this position, but also you are the first HR person I'm appointing into my team that's been actually selling our products. So you come at it through a very different angle. And that was the start of a 20-year career and a journey that really was incredibly rewarding and something that I always have good things to say about, even though I'm not in it anymore.
Navid, and what a great company to work for. Talk to us a little bit about you. You've become a transitions expert. Talk to us a bit about those transitions. So you did Adidas for a very long time. You excelled in this vision you had for yourself to be in the people's business, right? So how did you transition to what you do today?
Sure. So I have indeed been going through multiple transitions myself, Stephanie, and I didn't plan it like that. Let me be very honest with you and your listeners. I wish I was that strategically foresighted 26 years ago to say, you know what, 26 from now, I'm going to publish my international best-selling book. I'm going to become the world's #1 coach and jump ship and do what I love doing. So it wasn't really like that. I was just curious and hungry to learn. And so, as you say, I've transitioned from sales into HR. That was a cross-functional
Mm,
transition. I have transitioned, and Adidas was my only first HR role. I've moved from Adidas to GE, General Electric. At the time in 2005, they were the world's most admired company. I've
mm,
moved on from them to another company called BAT, to another company called Roche, to another company called Vodafone. And so I've moved multiple times and transitioned into various industries. I've also transitioned into international positions. I mean, I've been living and working in 5 countries, and I
mm,
learned a thing or two about what it means to prove yourself in an interculturally different environment that is very different than the one
mm,
that you're used to growing up in.
mm.
So those have been my transitions, and this also led me to start to think about writing the book because I just couldn't find a book that touches upon this topic for the senior leadership level. And so I really tried hard, did my research, only to figure out that there isn't a single book written on the topic. So I might as well, if I feel really excited about, which I was, I might as well start writing the book myself.
Navid, so talk to us about your best-selling book that's been, it's widely read all over the world because you share those important insights on the experiences that you had, right, transitioning all these different roles. So, what do you want the readers to know? How can we all, what are the top tips on transitioning into new roles?
Sure. So the book is roughly divided into 4 parts. I mean, it's 242 pages. It consists of 14 chapters. But if I wanted to kind of chop it up in 4 parts, the very first part looks at the history of career transitions and why it's a worthwhile topic
Mm,
to, spend time and energy and attention to. The second part of the book looks at what are the top 10 reasons for executive transition failure? I mean, what gets in the way? How come that only 6 out of 10 senior leaders are successful
yeah.
when they go through a career transition? And, I can also reveal at this stage that I have had unsuccessful transitions myself in my executive life. And I think when I moved to GE, that was the first time I really realized that whatever had made me successful prior to that is not going to serve me well in this current role, in this current
Mm,
organizational culture, and the
mm,
very different style of leadership I experienced at the time.
mm,
Um, so that's the second part of the book. And then the third part, which is by far the biggest chunk of the book, looks at, okay, so we know why it's a worthwhile topic. We know what can go wrong. If people wanted to get this right, what are successful interventions, of which I describe 10 in my book? So there are 10 successful interventions that either the executive or the HR person in the organization or the board of directors can do to help their executives to succeed more often than not. And then the last part of the book looks at a topic that is deeply unexplored. This goes back to the year 2020, Stephanie. So when there was no ChatGPT at the time, and I used good old Google to do my research. And I remember when you were to enter how to be most effective in your first 90, 100, or 120 days in a new role,
mm.
at that time, you would get something like 5 billion search results, which is a lot. But
Wow.
again, the
No.
first 90 days is a very popular topic. Now, if you were to only change out the word first with the word last, so how to be most successful in your last 90, 100, or 120 days, the search results drop below 10 million.
Mm,
And so that really was a guide for me to think about, okay, if we think of transitioning as a complete cycle, right? Think of the 4 times 100 relay race where you have to pass the baton on to the next runner and the next runner and so on. So if we were to apply that logic to transitions, There are also things that the outgoing executive can do to help the incoming one to be
Mm,
more successful than they were when they came in. And
mm.
so that's the last chapter of my book. It literally is titled Your Last 90 Days in an Executive Role. And that in itself, those four parts make up the book.
Navid, so the first thing I'm thinking, you said 6 out of 10 transitions are successful. How come? What are the reasons?
Yes. I mean, there are many reasons, and there are 10 in my book that I explore. But if I wanted to give you some high-level ideas and the listeners to your podcast, the first one is what Marshall Goldsmith, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, who's a mentor to me, and I'm part of his coaching organization, wrote in one of his best-selling books. And that book is titled, What Got You Here Won't
Mm,
Get You There.
mm,
And I think there's something quite telling, Stephanie, about the fact that I have just been promoted into this bigger role or responsibility. I will naturally keep repeating what actually got me this big level
yeah.
promotion. I have a tendency, and this is very much a tendency of human beings, to take out the playbook and just keep repeating it, hoping that it's going to serve me well.
Mm,
But as we know too well, as soon as you step up into the top level leadership, you cannot just continue doing the things that you were doing. Now, some of it you may want to continue and you ought to, but some of it you need to drop off and think about what is the new mix of skills and activities I now need to focus on
mm,
compared to where I came from and what I used to do. So that's one of the reasons. And then the other three, if I wanted to group the top 10 reasons for executive transition failure into only three top reasons, grouped reasons. The first one is people, the second one is culture, and the third one is politics. So, as I said it in one of the other podcasts, it's the functional or technical skills that gets you hired at the executive level, and it's the lack of soft skills that gets you fired in the
mm,
same level of leadership.
mm. I hear this all the time, Navid. I'm thinking, I mean, I'm almost thinking, does every top leader in this day and age need to be a coach, basically?
Well, either they have to be a coach or they can be using some of the instruments that we do use as coaches, or they can choose to partner with a coach. But in any case, I think also if you have a very capable HR leader, they can be a crucial advice to you and to
Mm,
your success.
mm,
But as my research has also suggested in the book, the two most critical stakeholders you need to align with are your boss and your direct reports, your team.
mm.
So no matter whether you are appointed in to become CFO, CPO, CTO, whatever the C-level title is that you're holding, those two are your crucial stakeholders to really make sure you align very well and to listen to them and guide and inspire as you go along.
Navid, these human soft skills that you were just speaking about, they seem to sort of play a huge role when one gets up into those high positions. What are the human sort of lessons that you learned from working with so many people over the years?
Sure. So this is my framework that I don't talk about in my book, but it's one of the tools I use in my coaching practice. And I call those, Stephanie, the six essential qualities of extraordinary leaders.
Mm,
And so I can walk you through the six, and that hopefully gives the answer to your question. So the first two that I have on that list are being confident as well as being self-aware. And
mm,
these two qualities pay dividend on your self-leadership. And the idea behind self-leadership is to expand your identity. Now, if you think of it without mentioning any particular names, there are some very famous world politicians right now that have a ton of self-confidence, but unfortunately are lacking what we call the self-awareness, the look in the
No
mirror
self-awareness.
to
Yeah.
really see how are my key messages landing?
Mm,
How are they particularly landing with the audience that is a little more critical or very critical to what I have to share?
mm,
So those are the first two. And that gets us into the next set of two. And these two are being connected as well as inspiring.
mm,
And these two qualities pay a dividend on team leadership because again, the higher we go in our career and grow into more senior roles, the less likely it's just about us. It's about how we are able to work with teams and teams of people that are reporting into us. And so these two pay a dividend on the team leadership. And the idea behind those two is that we enhance our reach and impact. And so again, if you think of connected as the Wi-Fi symbol, which we sometimes have on our smartphones and our tablets and devices, it's really being able to connect with anyone and everyone and not just with the next level of leadership and
mm,
the next one up. And then inspiring means really being able to bring people on a journey. If you are stepping up into a top level position, it's quite likely that you have to get buy-in into some sort of a strategy direction or a mission and vision and gathering the troops to be excited about delivering on that. And
definitely.
so these are the third and the fourth one. And that brings me to the fifth and the sixth one. The fifth one is courage, and the sixth one is clarity. Again, I know a ton of senior executives who have an awful lot of courage, but most of them are lacking what I call clarity, which is
Mm,
okay, what are we here to achieve? And why are we going about achieving that particular target? Why is it that we want to become the number one of in our industry, whatever that may be? And these two pay a dividend on our business leadership. And the idea behind that is that, unless we work for a charitable organization, but even some charities are very competitive these days, we are here to elevate business results and impact of what we do. So it's the combination of those six that help an executive leader to start thinking about what you and I refer to as soft skills, or how can they step up to own more of those softer elements of leadership that may or may not necessarily be linked to hard KPIs and hard numbers and technical kind of foundations of what you're here to achieve.
Navid, and do you have any insight on, our young people joining the workforce? So, A, we would love to get some tips that you have for university leavers, in terms of finding their first jobs and also being in their first jobs. And also some insight around, those sort of the cultures that they're looking for when going into a job, because they are quite different from our generation.
Mm. Sure. I mean, what I can share with you, it's less about the strategy of how to enter into the workforce, but really this is a piece of research I conducted back then when I was working for one of the large multinational companies they hired me to. And they said, Navid, we want you to go out and figure out the success formula of our most successful leaders.
Mm,
And that was a fantastic project brief. I can't tell you that, Stephanie, that I was so excited to go about and finding out more. So at that time, I interviewed our top 100 leaders in the same organization and distilled that into and I had no idea what's going to come out, right? I
mm,
had literally no idea. And bear in mind, Stephanie, that many of those, like myself, had been working for various other organizations before stepping into this other company. And so that simple question also meant that I was also keen about their previous experiences and also some of the formative years that they started the journey professionally in their careers. So what came out of that were 12 unique experiences. And that really was a surprise finding for myself because I wasn't sure, am I looking for skills? Am I looking for a
mm.
framework? Am I looking for tips? Like, what is it? And again, at the time, there was no chat GPT, sadly. So I had to sit down and just do use my good old brain to crunch this down into two formative experiences. And if you have to imagine those 12 experiences to be bucketed into three dimensions. So three buckets, each including four experiences.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was the business bucket, or business focus, as we called it at the time. And that included those four experiences. The first one was work in and with a variety of client groups. So if
Mm-hmm.
you work for a larger organization, make sure you work for an operating entity, make sure you work at the regional level, and also make sure if there's some sort of a mothership or a head office, you also get to work there. The second experience was international experience, means living and working in a country or more than one country that is not yours. The third one was working in a variety of business scenarios, meaning don't only work for startups or work for companies that are super successful, which because that's easy. How about you work for a company that is winding down and really struggling to establish itself in the marketplace properly or keep the market share? And the fourth one was moving between headquarter and affiliate roles as much as you can. So that was the first four experiences. The next set of four, interesting enough, were in the people focus or in the people dimension. First one is lead people. We called it lead direct reports. Again, I remember when I first got this opportunity, I was clearly not prepared for it because at that time there was no course on how to become a great leader. They just gave me these two employees and suddenly had to lead. The second one is to manage and lead in large projects, meaning the project team then reports into you as the project leader. They're not necessarily your people entirely, but again, leading those indirectly, which is the third one, also gives you an idea around, okay, how can I, it's actually more difficult. How can I motivate and lead a batch of people that aren't on the org chart reporting into me, but I still am here to inspire them and get them to do what I want them to do. And then the fourth and last one on the people dimension is accepting stretch assignments. I remember at GE at the time, they would never allow you to go into the most senior level if you had not accepted at least one stretch assignment previously.
Mm-hmm.
And that stretch assignment meant that if I was the, let's say, middle management level HR leader, I would need to go and work in the audit function or in the marketing function for 2 to 3 years to really learn everything from scratch in an entirely different function that is my home function, to then be considered for more senior roles in the HR department. So those are the next set of four. And then that brings us to the last four of the 12 formative experiences that I titled self-improvement. The first one was, and this is going to be very relevant to you and to your audience, Stephanie, seek and accept mental feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't tell you how much of a game changer this one out of the 12 experiences can be because, we are luckier than we sometimes assume we are because we can look for people that have been there and done that and who can guide us with career advice and counsel, oftentimes in a pro bono type way without us
Yeah.
being able to even pay them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first one. The second one is undertake external studies and or internal leadership programs if they are available to you. The third one is build numerical and financial awareness and knowledge, meaning I don't have to work in a sales function or in the finance function to know all about the numbers of our business. I ought to learn about what makes us successful as a business and what are the underlying drivers of growth for me and for us. And then the last one is building professional networks both inside the company and outside the organization. And those 12 were the juice or the magical success formula that encompass the top 100 leaders in that organization, including their previous careers. And then we use that as a career framework to help with our employees. You can imagine if I was your employee, Stephanie, at the time you were my head of HR and I was your HR manager, I would sit down in my career development session with you and say, Stephanie, now that I know that these 12 experiences would help me to succeed, I already have covered these four. would you support me if I were to focus on this and this for the next 12 months to come? And with your permission, you and I would really hone in on me getting and adding those two experiences, one or two, over the course of the next year. And so each year we would have the same conversation and add and add and add so that eventually I am able to cover most of these experiences over time.
Navid, I'm so grateful that you shared that because that's invaluable information for our younger listeners. So, in your experience, Navid, we talk a lot about connection and rallying the troops, right? Which is what people in leadership positions have to do. What are your sort of top three tips for that? Because it's the most important thing. And everyone I interview, it's all about that, right? In the end, it's about connection and it's about creating that leadership where people follow you. How can we do that?
Sure. So if you were to think about the six essential qualities that we just explored, I use a particular framework to bring that to life, which speaks to what you're trying to get to now, which is, okay, I know those six qualities. How do I bring the horsepower on the road? And the framework that I use is from a gentleman. As a published author, I'm always keen to make sure that I give credit to whoever is the originator of the particular framework. So this gentleman is called Dr. BJ Fogg, and he's a professor at Stanford University. And he has done something that many HR leaders, I have to be careful what I say now, haven't quite managed to do, which
Mm,
is the higher you go up, the more simplistic your individual development plan must be. Or else you will have a tendency to have, as I have often seen that from my executive coaching clients, a 12-page document that nobody is able to say, what are you actually trying to achieve here? Can you just give me the highlight?
yeah.
So this particular framework is called the one page of truth. And Dr. BJ Fogg calls this the behavior grid. So you have to imagine those six qualities to be broken down in three different buckets. The first one is, what are some of those qualities that I am pretty good at? And I must continue to demonstrate. Okay. And then he has two buckets underneath. One is, how can I reinitiate behavior that's familiar to me already? How can I, ramp it up? And the other one is, how can I increase the behavior intensity? So how can I amplify what I'm already doing, which is
Mm,
great. So that's the continue doing bucket. The second one is, what must I start to demonstrate that I am not demonstrating yet? So let's say if I have done the work with my team and my coach has been helping me with that, and we both know that I am lacking on, let's say, the self-awareness part, right? I'm pretty good on confidence. I'm very good with connected, but self-awareness and clarity are the two big opportunities for me. Well, that's great because we can then think about, okay, what is one or two start doing activities for me that pay dividend on these one or
mm,
two
mm,
qualities.
mm,
And then the last bucket is stop doing. What is it that I must stop doing? Either decreasing the behavior intensity, so dialing it down, or stop the existing behavior because, quite frankly, that is not helpful at all for
mm,
me or for my team. I'll give you a simple example. I was working with a gentleman. He was the chief sales officer of a global organization, but he had a regional remit here in the Middle East. And when I did his 360 with a set of his peers, with his boss, and a set of his direct reports, three of the three direct reports that I interviewed on behalf of the gentleman said, you know, let's call him John. John has a great sense of humor, and we really appreciate that about him because even in the toughest moments as a chief sales officer, and I'm sure you will come across many pressured moments, he never loses his sense of humor.
mm.
But the issue is that the humor is always geared towards us and always including us in the humor. He never has jokes about himself.
Oh,
And so that was his stop doing activity because it's always great to show and demonstrate a great sense of humor, but it's if it's always at someone else's expense, that's
Yeah.
probably not a good behavior to
Mm.
demonstrate. And so um, this is how I then go with my executive coaching clients to help them to distill the Hogan assessment results, the 360 assessment that I conduct on their behalf in anonymous interviews, and the client life journey intake interview that I conduct with them. And the totality of that will then be a simple one pager where they are able to tell anyone, including their partners, what am I here set out to achieve? And how am I going to go achieving that?
Navid, so what do you feel you have that makes you the number one executive coach? What are the qualities you feel you have that you either already had or you acquired or a mixture of that?
Oh, well, Stephanie, I guess you would have to ask the judges that have identified me for that prestigious role 3 years in a row. But if I wanted to give my humble take as to what I think may have led them to this, next to the client feedback and whatever the process includes, it's a combination of what I call having the embodied experience
Hmm.
as someone who has been talking the talk and walking the walk previously. So I think that's one. And then the other thing is my obsession for getting results for my clients, no
Hmm.
matter what it takes. And
Hmm.
so I have a very clear bias for action. I do not care about this framework or that framework if they do not get my clients the results that they so desire to get. And I guess there's something about goal attainment on behalf of my clients that probably also plays a role here.
Navid, so what does success look like for you these days?
Yeah, it's super simple for me, Stephanie. It's not about what sophisticated tools I apply in my coaching framework and all these wonderful awards of which I've gotten 10 over the last couple of years that have come my way. The only measure of success that I'm interested is my client able to achieve their desired outcomes in the time that we have contracted
Hmm.
to do that.
Hmm.
And that's really the measure of success that I really deeply care about. And that's what gets me out of bed every single morning.
Yeah. So talk to us about your plans and goals, Navid. What are the next years looking like?
Mm. So I have to go back to probably one of the first mentors I had in my life. And this is my first role as a sales associate. So as an individual contributor selling sporting goods and trainers or sneakers to customers that walk into a branch. And so his name is Michael Klein, by the way. And he said to me, I was new in the role, had never sold a thing in my life before. And I approached him in my first week and said, Michael, how can I become a good salesperson? How can I upskill myself in the sales function and role? And I was expecting him to give me books and this and that. And he said, Oh, it's great that you asked me this question in your first week of being employed here because I've had people who have been working here for a year and struggling and that still do not dare to come forward and ask me this question. So there's something about the proactiveness that I appreciate about you. But more importantly, I have only two pieces of advice for you. The first one is you do not have to be great at anything. You only have to be great at becoming better every single day,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which, if you think of it, it's the continuous improvement philosophy. You can call it Kaizen, lean, whatever the term is. Really, you don't have to be great at anything, but if you pay attention, if you're curious and you gather your data points, and all you care is to be a little better tomorrow than you were
Hmm.
today, that in itself will set you up on a trajectory of success. And the second thing he said is, and again, it felt a little counterintuitive when he shared that with me. The second piece of advice as a mentor he shared with me was, how can you think about deeply and do it consistently? How can you put yourself in the shoes of your customers? And by that, he meant that, and there's a very particularly interesting story about a car sales dealer in the US who was outperforming any other car sales, even the most successful ones, by a factor of 14 or something, like some crazy number. Which ultimately meant that if he learned that, Stephanie, if you were my client and you came to me and you wanted to buy a car, and in that conversation, I realized that the kind of car you want to buy, we do not produce in the company I'm working for. I would not hesitate to give you a direct recommendation how I can get your dream car in our competitors' showroom. But that's honest advice and that genuinely wanting to help you out with your request would actually make sure that not only you eventually will come back to me, but you will be sending friends, family, and other people who just are interested to buy a car to me again because you genuinely felt that this was the most open, honest, and helpful advice you have received from someone that in a society may not be the most trustworthy job position and title. And so those two things really helped me to to become exceptionally good at sales in a relatively foreseeable time period. And as I said, I appreciate that about sales because it's the most transparent function when you want to measure performance.
Navid, I love listening to you. I'm so grateful for your time. I'm so grateful that you peppered your story with insights that are so helpful to anyone who's listening. Young people, people in mid-level positions, top executives. Everyone can have a piece of you by buying the book, which is a bestseller, Mastering Executive Transitions. Navid, and is there any closing word that you would like to leave people with, like the takeaways maybe of your story?
Mm. Yeah, I would like to come back to what I said initially, which is even when I finished my school, I didn't even know what to study.
Mm.
And so do not worry if you haven't figured the next 10 years out yet. Just trust your instincts, stay curious, stay hungry, and stay humble. And that is my final advice for people who are early in their career and are, just curious as to what might be up next for them. So I never had a 10-year plan for anything in my life. I never really mapped out what the next 5 or 7 years even could look like. But I was always curious about the one next position after this one, and that was enough to keep me going for 26 years. And arguably, I'm not really in a terrible spot. So if I can make it like that, anyone can do it.
What a powerful finish. Navid Nazemian, thank you so much for your time and your incredible story.
Thank you, Stephanie. Much appreciated.